folks. I'm Joseph Gubbels. Like was mentioned, I'm a master's student in political science and public administration at the University of Ottawa. And I was invited to speak here based on some work that I've been doing with Polis. So the topic I suggested for my presentation was how to build a new democracy in Canada. And that's how I understand my own work and what I've been doing. So I just really quickly maybe thought I can run through how I'm understanding the term democracy when I'm giving this presentation and when I'm speaking to people about this work. And then I can talk about some of the work that I've done with Polis and some of the other exciting work that I see going on in this space that people here may or may not know about. And then I'm happy to take questions and discuss with people afterwards. So the first and most important thing to understand here, I think, is that when we're talking about democracy, there's, I think, a sense in ordinary conversations and in kind of our pop understanding of politics that we just mean elected government, or we mean representation, or we mean parliament, or something like that. And I think we can have a much more ambitious understanding of what this term is. And democracy is really a principle that can be realized more or less well by any given set of institutions, any given state, any given society. And democracy really at the core is a principle, and that principle is individual and collective self-rule. So when we say Canada is a democracy, it's kind of like saying Canada is a freedom. It's a type error. It doesn't really make sense even grammatically. And so there is this common way of speaking, obviously, where we say a country is democratic to mean that it has representative institutions. But when we understand that we're talking really about a principle, we understand that country A might be more or less democratic than country B, but it can also be improved. So Canada's democracy, I don't think, has to forever be stuck the way that it is. And I think there's a lot of room to improve it. And I think that's space for civic technologists like yourselves. And there's a lot of exciting work going on in this space. So when I say individual and collective self-rule, I'm not talking just about voting. I'm talking about discussing and then voting as needed. But really the core activity that you should be thinking about when you're thinking about democracy is speaking with and persuading other people to decide on what we want to do together. And it's not consent to rule, it's self-rule. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity to be using digital tools like Polis, like Decidim, like some of the others I might talk about later on to advance this principle. So, I think the big incentive for us to be doing this work is that representative government is not really working super well right now. We're seeing a lot of division. We're seeing a lot of ineffective policymaking. We're seeing that our current systems of government, which have existed more or less unchanged since the 1700s or the 1800s, have not really coped well with the speed and size and complexity of today's societies and today's social and political problems. And they're failing to live up to, most importantly, people's expectations of how much control we ought to have over our own lives and our own society. People have this idea when we talk about the democratization of media, the democratization of news, the democratization of this and that and culture, that we're getting more control over our society, but the kind of heights of political power are still not very open to ordinary people. And when I say not very open, again, I don't just mean they don't listen to people. I don't just mean they don't hear people or they don't consider what ordinary people think. I mean that there's no real space for political decision making for ordinary people. There's kind of your election every 4 years, but after you vote, you just go home and maybe you read the news, maybe you don't, maybe you protest, maybe you don't, but that's about the extent of your political engagement. And so when I'm talking about ways to make Canada more democratic, what I'm talking about is ways to give ordinary people not just a voice, not just a say, but power and an equal say in what the state is doing in our names. And I think this is a way that ordinary people can lead in a very kind of classic sense in the way that I'm sure a lot of people know the history of democracy comes back from Athens, but this was it was not a political system where people were voted into government. As we know, it was a political system where individual people can lead through speech and through persuasion. So Polis, I think, takes its name from that system, but I think it's a very interesting way to adapt this ancient kind of way of doing democracy to modern times. So I'm not sure how familiar people are here with Polis, but it's just a quick introduction for anyone who's not heard of it. It's an open source wiki survey tool, they call it, where you can submit comments and then vote on other people's comments. And then it runs some algorithms in the background to group people based on how they vote, and then look for comments that get support across those opinion groups. So instead of just prioritizing ideas that maybe a simple majority of people voted for, you are prioritizing ideas that have consensus support. So we've used Polis for a project around the Greenbelt in the summer of 2023. And then we used it again at the NDP convention in October 2023. And then most recently, it was used by NDP MP Matthew Green's office for consultations around a bill on the Israel-Palestine situation in this spring. And when explaining Polis to some of the civil society actors and some of the experts that we've been working with, I've been introducing it primarily as a way, like I said, to build consensus, to have respectful dialogue, to bridge divides and discover agreement. And I've seen firsthand how it has included people who would never normally participate in politics. They're not the kind of people that go to protests. They're not the kind of people that can stand up and speak on a microphone at a big convention. Maybe they just are a little shy, or maybe they have social anxieties, or maybe they have some sort of language barrier, or maybe they just are short on time, but they have really good ideas and they want to be involved in things. And I think Polis is a really good way to bring these people into the process, to find subtle differences of opinion between different groups, to surface unique ideas, and most importantly, to give ordinary people a way to lead by proposing their own ideas and allowing other people to build on those ideas, react to those ideas in this back and forth discussion that Polis allows. There's also a lot of other e-democracy tools in Canada, and especially in Europe, where these have become extremely popular since beginning around 2015, 2016, but especially after 2020. Barcelona was recently named the European Capital of Democracy for its work on democratization after the Indignados movement in 2015, 2016. A big part of this was the creation of Decidim, which is another e-democracy tool. It's a bit different than Polis, but kind of doing the same thing of trying to empower ordinary people. And if I remember the numbers correctly, I think about 25 to 30% of the population of Barcelona is using this tool or has used this tool to participate in everything from participatory budgeting to idea proposal and the design of new parks and zoning decisions and municipal bylaw creation. And there's a lot of similar tools, a lot of similar platforms in Canada, but a lot of them are a lot less ambitious and a lot less institutionalized than what we've seen in Europe. There's new websites like Shape Your City in Vancouver, Engage Ottawa up here in Ottawa, Consultation Québec for the entire province of Quebec. The federal government is running a couple of these different platforms, but they are typically using this proprietary tool called Engagement HQ, sold by a US tech giant called Granicus. And like I said, they are not really very well institutionalized, and they're not really very well promoted, and they haven't had very big effects so far. But I think in addition to Polis, this is an area where Toronto has an opportunity to really step out in front of the pack. And I think there's space to push the city council, the mayor, to be adopting these tools and adopting some of the best practices that we've seen in Europe, adopting some work that could be done by civic tech activists in Toronto and in the rest of Canada, really. And this is an opportunity for the Toronto city government to do something without necessarily needing to have the support of provincial and federal governments that might not be super friendly to this. And this is something that I think we could see Toronto being called the North American capital of democracy maybe in a couple of years. But it starts with people learning about these tools. It starts with us getting in familiarity with how to use them, how to deploy them. And I think because they're all open source, there's a lot of room as well for people to be making contributions to the code behind these tools and developing new features, developing new tools. But like I kind of said at the beginning, I think this should be understood as a way to advance democracy, not just a way to add a little bit of consultation around the edges of what the city government is doing right now, not just a way to make people feel heard, but a way to really advance democratic equality. And there's this idea from Charles Taylor. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with him, one of the most famous Canadian political philosophers, who describes democracy as a vector forward, that the last 400, 300 years of modern history have been a story of advancing democracy, advancing equality, advancing freedom for ordinary people, and advancing individuals' opportunities to control their own lives and their own society together. And I think that there's a big opportunity and a big need right now for us to take this next step along that path. And I think Polis can be a small part of that. Tools like Tessadine can be a small part of that. But people in Toronto can be a very, very big part of that. So that's my perspective, kind of coming newly to this civic tech space. And I am happy to take questions or hear people's thoughts on that. And I can go into some more details as well if anyone wants on some of the processes we've run. But